These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. Actor Tom Mix, or possibly his double, is captured in mid-air as he rides a horse over Beals Cut during filming of 3 Jumps Ahead in 1923. The rock gap is around 90 feet deep. 18-year-old Arnold Schwarzenegger stands with a schoolmate in Austria, already looking more like a young champion than a teenager. At this age, he had just won the Junior Mr. Europe title. Russian emigrant Pavel Gorgolov stands in custody after using a pistol against French President Paul Doumer at a Paris book fair on 6 May 1932. Doumer died in hospital from his wounds, and Gorgolov soon faced the highest penalty under French law for the attack. A Hungarian soldier wears an experimental gas mask with a built-in microphone, amplifier, and speaker, designed so his voice could cut through battle noise in 1939. Volcanologists Maurice and Katia Kraft stand near a towering lava fountain as they film an eruption in the 1980s. Across their careers, they documented about 150 eruptions worldwide. This strange cell from the time of the Spanish Civil War used a slanted bed, uneven bricks, and abstract wall art inspired by Dali and Kandinsky to disturb captives. Luis Buñuel's film An Andalusian Dog was projected here as psychological pressure. Crowds surround Nathuram Godse moments after he fired 3 times at Mahatma Gandhi during a prayer meeting in 1948. Rescue teams search the mountainside where Japan Airlines Flight 123 came down on 12 August 1985. Out of 524 people on board, only 4 were found alive, making it the deadliest single aircraft accident in history. Soviet soldiers take German troops prisoner in Berlin in May 1945, including one man wearing a woman's dress. Photographer Anatoly Morozov caught this strange moment when disguise, not force, became a last attempt to escape. The first Harley-Davidson motorcycle in 1903 used a tomato can as its fuel tank. That rough garage machine became the starting point for one of the most famous motorcycle brands on the planet. An Italian father proudly carries his whole family on a Lambretta scooter during the boom years in Sicily in 1963. For many families, this little machine was their first dream vehicle, a symbol that they had finally stepped into a new, modern life. The experimental tailless Soldenhof A3 flies over the water in Germany in 1930, a strange bird with no rear wing. The prototype drew investor money but was lost in a later flight, and the Soldenhof Aero Company closed just 2 years later. Sheriff Chester Davis and his deputies pose with a handcuffed moonshiner and rows of seized jars in Roane County, Tennessee in 1940. In a time when making drink for yourself was overlooked, but selling it was not, this dusty car became proof of where the line was drawn. An Indonesian villager has his teeth carefully filed into sharp points as part of a traditional beauty and adulthood ritual in 1938. In several island communities, pointed teeth were a mark of courage and refinement. A milkman calmly wades through floodwater to finish his deliveries in Britain in 1954. Even with streets turned into rivers, the morning milk still arrived at every door. A sea of hats fills Wall Street as men crowd around the scene of a mysterious explosion on 16 September 1920. The blast took dozens of lives and hurt many more, yet those behind it were never definitively found. A group of women in the United States model different protective masks during a civil defense demonstration in 1940. As conflict grew in Europe, ordinary citizens were trained to use this gear in case danger ever reached their own cities. A technician adjusts the rooftop antenna of one of the first televisions ever installed in a taxi in Chicago in 1948. For stunned passengers, this rolling living room was an early glimpse of the in-car entertainment future. 7 veterans of the First World War sit in wheelchairs at a London military hospital in 1918, together showing only one remaining leg. This calm group portrait hints at how huge the hidden human cost of the trenches really was. To protect airfields during the Second World War, British forces built armored forts on wheels that could be quickly towed to any threatened side of the runway. Through narrow firing slits, a small crew could watch the perimeter and turn an open field into a moving strong point. These experimental special forces, boots from the 1970s, had soles shaped like bare feet, designed for jungle missions in Vietnam. The idea was that enemy trackers would see human footprints and never guess a squad in advanced gear had passed by. This heavy steel body armor from 1881 was actually worn in real combat. Reports say it stopped around 18 shots, turning its wearer into a walking shield. Crowds line up outside a Beate Ussi store in East Germany in 1989, the first legal adult shop in the German Democratic Republic. After decades of tight control, curious locals rushed in to see items that had been hidden from them for years. Police stand outside Charles' barbershop in New York in 1943 as workers wheel out sacks from a secret 8-ton potato stash. Photographer Ouija caught this surreal moment when a small barbershop turned out to be a hidden food warehouse. A British Matilda tank hides inside a lightweight sunshield frame, carefully shaped to look like a harmless truck in Egypt in 1941. Before the Battle of El Alamein, hundreds of these fake trucks and hidden tanks helped mislead enemy scouts about where the real strike would come. 2,000 people pack into a hall in Bergen to watch Norway's Intercity Chess Championship in 1924. The players sit shoulder to shoulder in long rows, turning a quiet board game into a full-scale spectator event. Born in 1851 in the Ural region with no arms and no legs, Nikolai Kobalkov taught himself to read, write, and perform remarkable stage tricks that amazed audiences across Europe. A United States Navy medic lies on the ground in Vietnam in March 1968, using a stethoscope to listen for hidden Viet Cong tunnels. In this strange scene, medical gear becomes a tool for silent hunting under the soil. A cigar factory worker in Havana in 1960 checks each hand-rolled cigar with the same care she gives to the one in her mouth. Generations of such experts help turn Cuban cigars into a symbol of luxury worldwide. A German Tiger tank is seen from below, showing the maze of interleaved road wheels on its belly. This complex layout gave a smoother ride, but made repairs in mud and ice painfully slow for its crew. Engineers Charles Ginsberg, Charles Anderson, and Ray Dolby stand proudly around the Ampex machine that became the first practical videotape recorder in 1956. The huge cabinet behind them could finally capture live television on magnetic tape. A boy on horseback pauses in the California desert to watch the Space Shuttle Enterprise roll past in 1977. In one frame, centuries of travel meet as a child rides the past, while the future quietly moves by. A stunt driver leans out of his car to grab cash from spectators while racing sideways around a vertical arena in Rajkot, India, in the 1970s. These carnival riders rely on speed and centrifugal force to keep their cars glued to the wall. British Baron Charles Grenaway arranges thousands of toy soldiers on a huge battlefield diorama in the 1940s. His collection was so large that he could restage entire historic battles in miniature across his drawing room. The cast and crew of the Soviet film Sherlock Holmes. The 20th Century Begins pose for a group photo in 1986. This adaptation, starring Vasily Livanov, became so beloved that even British fans later praised it as one of the best screen versions of Holmes. A self-service kiosk in Dushanbe in the 1960s lets shoppers pick goods, pay, and take their own change with no clerk watching. The sign literally says, "Stall without seller." A giant sturgeon lies on a market table in the Murawski Halls in Warsaw in September 1927, taken from the Vistula River. Fish of this size once swam European rivers often, but today such giants are almost never seen. Anna Haining Bates, about 2 meters 43 tall, stands with her husband, Martin Van Buren Bates, about 2 meters 41. In the 19th century, they were famous as the tallest married couple on record, drawing crowds wherever they appeared. This so-called vampire kit from the 19th century holds wooden stakes, a crucifix, a pistol, and a prayer book for protection against the night. Many such kits were probably made for curious travelers, mixing real fear with clever souvenir trade. Civil engineer Maurice Shannon stands on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood in 1939, wearing a sign that reads, "Just an American looking for a job. Ask me." Photographer Carl Meidens caught this quiet protest of a man who turned himself into a walking resume on the street. A Rolls-Royce 1920 pattern-armored car sits ready, its luxury chassis wrapped in thick plates and rivets. These vehicles served from desert patrols to colonial wars, proving that a high-end car could be turned into a rolling fortress. A UH-1 Huey helicopter sits parked in a shallow stream while its crew scrubbed the mud off in Vietnam in 1966. For a moment, the combat machine turns into a giant metal car in a very unusual wash bay. On the set of The Silence of the Lambs, Anthony Hopkins gets a French fry fed through Hannibal Lecter's mask by director Jonathan Demme. Off-camera, the terrifying doctor turns back into a laughing actor, joking with the crew between takes. Contestants line up for the Miss Straight Back competition in Los Angeles in 1927. The pageant was sponsored by the National Association of Chiropractors, who used perfect posture as their beauty standard. A Turkish crew flies a Black Hawk helicopter through a full vertical loop in 1983, a move normally reserved for fighter jets. The photo freezes the machine upside down in mid-air, proving just how far pilots will push rotary wings. Italian racer Nino Farina sits in his Alfa Romeo Tipo 158 after winning the very first Formula One World Championship in 1950. His car, nicknamed the Alfetta, was so fast that it dominated nearly every race that season. Children on bicycles stop and silently watch a huge hillside fire race through La Tuna Canyon in California in 1977. Two brothers who once fought on opposite sides in the American Civil War sit for a reunion portrait, one in gray and one in blue. Decades later, they pose side by side for photographer Finley Taylor in Richwood, West Virginia, in the 1910s. This Swedish railway snowplow in 1924 used a giant spinning drum to chew through drifts taller than the train. In a single pass, it could reopen lines that had been buried and silent for days. Formula One cars line up on the London tarmac in 1963, ready to roll straight into a super freighter cargo plane. Flying the whole grid like this cut travel from days by ship to just hours, helping turn the series into a real-world championship. The giant Dornier 2X flying boat made its first flight on 12 July 1929, then the largest airplane in the world. With 12 engines and a luxury cabin like an ocean liner, it tried to turn the sky into a sea voyage. The Mercedes-Benz W125 record wagon is shown in the German pavilion at the 1937 Paris World's Fair, shaped like a smooth silver bullet. A year later, a version of this car set a public road speed record of about 430 kilometers per hour. Coach Alexander Gomelsky looks up at his 7'3" center Vladimir Tkachenko during a CSKA game in Moscow in 1986. The huge height gap between them became an iconic image of Soviet basketball's golden era. These cold tablets from 1906, made by Eli Lilly, were packed with a powerful stimulant that is now banned in most countries. Back then, doctors gave it for coughs, sore throats, and even low mood, thinking it was a modern miracle cure. Pablo Escobar sits in one of his secret cash warehouses in Colombia in 1982, surrounded by stacks of bills and tangled rubber bands. His organization pulled in so much cash that millions were reportedly lost each year to rats, mold, and simple miscounting. Villagers aligned with the Viet Cong sharpened bamboo stakes and set them in deep jungle pits to catch United States patrols. The stakes were often smeared with dirty matter, so even a small wound could turn into a serious infection that might cost a limb. Allied soldiers in 1945 read newspapers shouting that the dictator is gone. For many of them, this headline meant the nightmare in Europe was finally almost over. An Afghan war veteran drops to one knee before the portrait of a fallen friend, while young soldiers stand in a line holding photos of those who never came home. Al Capone sits in his cell in the 1930s, calmly picking a tune on his banjo. In prison, he played in the jail band, trading life as a feared boss for simple songs behind bars. Prohibition agents in the United States pour seized drinks straight into a street drain in the 1920s. Each barrel dumped was a small victory for the law and a heartbreak for the hidden speakeasies that supplied it. A United States Douglas A. Forge Sky Raider climbs away as a white phosphorus blast blooms over North Vietnamese positions in 1966. The blinding spray was used to mark targets and strip jungle cover, turning the hillside into a brief artificial sun. Members of the Kormakov group pose with their improvised weapons in Kazan in 1945, just months after the war ended. Locals later remembered them as one of the boldest criminal bands of the hungry post-war years. A lava fountain on Hawaii in 1969 blows a perfect glowing dome out of a crack in the crust. For a few seconds, it looked like a rising sun made of liquid rock. Brent Daniel shows his suitcase-sized superheterodyne radio in 1924 with 7 glowing tubes and its own batteries inside. From Washington, he could tune stations all the way from the Pacific coast, a shocking range for something you could carry by hand. A propaganda poster in Germany in November 1933 shows President Paul von Hindenburg beside his rising deputy under the slogan, "The Marshal and the Corporal fight with us for peace and equality." A First World War veteran plays the violin in the street, using a metal prosthetic to hold the bow, around 1919. Engineers built custom hooks and joints so musicians like him could keep performing instead of giving up their art. An M3A1 armored car hides in a Tunisian cactus field in 1943, its plates painted to blend with the spines. From the air, it looked like just another patch of desert plants, while a gun waited quietly inside. A British canary girl in the First World War fills a shell with molten TNT, a job that stained workers' skin bright yellow. Many of these women later suffered serious health problems from constant exposure to the chemical. The bow of the British cruiser HMS Fearless is crushed after the nighttime Battle of May Island training disaster in 1918. In thick mist, she struck and sank Submarine K-17, one of several Royal Navy collisions that cost over 100 sailors their lives without a single enemy in sight. Hands are pressed against the fence at Hillsborough Stadium on 15 April 1989 as crowd control collapses. The tragedy during the Liverpool and Nottingham Forest Cup semi-final cost 96 lives and forced a complete rethink of stadium safety in England. In 1863, an enslaved man named Wilson Chin stands in iron restraints designed to stop him from escaping through windows or fences. His forehead brand and this collar came from a Louisiana sugar plantation owner, so notorious that even New York newspapers called his methods brutal. Budapest, February 1945. Soviet photographer Yevgeny Kalday captures a German DFS-230 glider wedged in an apartment block on Attila Street after a failed supply landing. Its pilot, Unteroffizier Georg Filius, did not survive the impact, ending another attempt to bring food. In World War II, some armies trained dogs to crawl under enemy tanks, rewarding them only when they ran to the vehicle for food. In battle, these dogs carried a charge with a contact rod that detonated under the tank's belly, turning the animal itself into an anti-armor weapon. A Russian observer leans out of a flimsy biplane with a box camera to photograph German lines during World War I. These dangerous low-altitude photo runs were how armies mapped enemy trenches before specialized aerial cameras and stabilized mounts appeared. A Welsh coal miner and his eldest son come home from the pit, still covered in coal dust, cradling the youngest children, 1931. In families like this, boys often went underground as teens, inheriting both the wage and the risk from their fathers. A German Adler L-35PS Army truck lies wrecked near Oriel during Russia's second military truck trials in 1912. Early powers used these brutal road tests as rolling laboratories, pushing fragile machines to their limits on rough tracks. In 1883, New York inventor Charles Fritz installed this early rooftop solar panel made from selenium cells coated with a thin layer of gold. It turned only about 1% of sunlight into electricity, but it marked the quiet beginning of solar power technology. J. Robert Oppenheimer and General Leslie Groves stand among the twisted remains of the Trinity Test Tower in New Mexico, September 1945. Just weeks earlier, this silent patch of desert had been ground zero for the first man-made nuclear fireball. A Pakistani intelligence officer casually poses for the camera while explosions rise on the Afghan horizon, CI 1980s. Behind his sunglasses, a hidden war between Soviet troops and local fighters is tearing the valley apart in dust and shockwaves. Secret Service agent Clint Hill leaps onto the presidential limousine seconds after the attack on John F. Kennedy in Dealey Plaza, Dallas, 22 November 1963. In those brief moments, he tried to shield the First Lady and the mortally wounded president with his own body. Paul McCartney throws a defiant thumbs up as Japanese authorities release him from a Tokyo detention center and put him on a plane home, 25 January 1980. He has just spent 9 days under arrest after customs officers found 219 grams of a banned substance in his luggage on arrival. Young women in Salzburg swarm a German staff sergeant as troops roll into Austria during the Anschluss, 14th March 1938. Many smiled and raised their arms that day, not yet knowing this union would drag their country into 6 years of war and ruin. A Sandinista fighter swings a firebomb and rifle while attacking the Nicaraguan National Guard headquarters in 1979, during the last days of the Somoza regime. Photographer Susan Meiselas captured the instant when street fighters helped force a family dictatorship to crumble almost overnight. A Red Army crewman on the Eastern Front lashes a Mosin rifle to the barrel of a 76mm ZIS-3 gun, turning it into an improvised sighting device. Such frontline hacks helped gunners aim more accurately at long range when proper optics were scarce or broken. U.S. soldiers march through ruined Cherbourg carrying captured strings of German sausage like battlefield trophies. Normandy, summer 1944. After the port fell to the Allies, food stockpiled for German troops quickly became a victory feast for the liberators. German soldiers haul Marshal Foch's historic armistice railcar out through a blasted hole in its memorial hall at Compiègne, France, June 1940. Hitler ordered the 1918 surrender wagon back onto the clearing so France would sign its own capitulation in the same spot that had once marked Germany's humiliation. French doctor Alain Bombard climbs aboard a rescue ship after drifting 65 days alone across the Atlantic in a tiny inflatable raft in 1952. He survived on seawater, fish, and plankton to prove that shipwrecked sailors could stay alive far longer than anyone believed. A Belarusian kolyadun poses in a handmade paper mask and shaggy puppet during midwinter caroling, 1930s. These eerie folk performers went door to door singing for gifts and scaring away evil spirits, blending old Slavic rites with Christmas traditions. Jewish immigrant girls march in New York with sashes reading "Abolish Child Slavery" in English and Yiddish, 1909. Many of these young garment workers spent 10 to 12 hours a day in sweatshops and now demanded shorter hours and safer factories. Marine Michael Tripp dives into a village church at An Hoa in 1967, hugging his rifle while mortar blasts shake the walls outside. Surrounded by statues and a crucifix, he waits out the barrage in a place meant for peace, not war. In 1918, a group of American soldiers crowd around a Red Cross nurse, proudly displaying a captured Mauser pistol, a German steel helmet, and a human skull. This macabre souvenir culture of the First World War turned shattered trenches into grim curio shops for men on leave. 26-year-old Salvador Dalí poses in the seaside village of Cadaqués, Spain, 1930, already dressing and posing like a walking piece of surrealism. In these summers he began shaping his bizarre, paranoia critical method that would soon make him the wild star of European art. Young Elizabeth Taylor is surrounded by amateur photographers on a beach in 1950, every camera pointed at the 18-year-old MGM star. Within a decade, this relaxed poolside model would be the highest-paid woman in Hollywood and half of one of its most talked-about couples. London's first public phone box, the concrete K1 kiosk, appears on the streets in 1922 as Britain cautiously tests this new way to talk across distance. Within a decade, its bony silhouette would be replaced by the famous red kiosks. In 1960s Soviet culture goods shops, these saleswomen quietly ruled access to the most coveted scarce items: televisions, records, toys, stylish lamps. If you were friends with them, the shelves suddenly filled with miracles others could only dream about. Border guards of the Mongolian People's Republic ride shaggy Bactrian camels along a frozen frontier in the mid-20th century. These camel patrols could stay in the saddle for days, going where trucks froze or stalled, turning the steppe itself into a living border fence. Russian soldiers stand outside a dugout in improvised gas masks, waiting for a possible gas attack on the Eastern Front in 1915. Within a year, scenes like this became routine as all major armies rushed to copy the new weapon instead of banning it. A barefoot girl in ruined Naples sells precious soap on the black market to keep her family alive in 1945. In post-war Italy, soap was so rare that a few bars could be traded for more than a worker's daily pay. In 1908 Naples, a spaghetti vendor feeds locals straight from huge steaming pans on the street. For centuries in Italy, pasta was the classic street food, eaten with bare hands long before forks ruled the table. Students in Paris step around fresh barricade wreckage to duck into a cinema still showing high noon, while the May 1968 general strike has 10 million workers in the streets. Outside looks like a revolution. Inside, Gary Cooper's cowboy is fighting his own showdown on the screen. Roma bear handlers in Romania make their chained animal dance to drum and pipe, a roadside show Lee Miller captured in 1938. Decades later, this centuries-old trade vanished as laws and sanctuaries finally took the last performing bears off the roads. American Boy Scouts in Butte, Montana, pile a truck high with scrap metal for a 1942 wartime salvage drive, proudly posing before it heads to the smelter. Kids across the U.S. collected millions of tons of scrap like this, which were melted down into tanks, ships, and planes for the front. Czechoslovak protesters surround Soviet tanks in central Prague on 21 August 1968, climbing the armor and waving their flag in the soldiers' faces. That day marked the start of the Warsaw Pact invasion that ended the brief Prague Spring of liberal reforms. British traveler Jim Parkinson squeezes into his toy-sized Wright-Craft microcar with Soviet writer Sergei Mikhalkov, drawing a crowd in 1965. The tiny former delivery car has just survived a long run from London, turning into a rolling symbol of thaw-era curiosity between the USSR and the West. West Berliners climb makeshift stands and peer over the newborn wall to glimpse family and friends now trapped in the East, 1961. Within months, the barrier will rise, topped with barbed wire and guards, turning these casual spectators into permanently divided relatives. Parisian boy struggles with an armful of baguettes as families quietly stockpile bread before a looming baker's strike. Paris, 1949. In a city obsessed with fresh loaves, even children were sent on emergency bread runs to survive a single day without them. A young recruit of the Palestinian Liberation Movement on drill in a training camp in Jordan, 1968. Many such camps included women who were stepping out of traditional domestic roles to join political and military life for the first time. Returning U.S. Marine logistics vehicles double as improvised troop trains, hauling rows of Iraqi prisoners of war across the Saudi desert during the Gulf War. The massive 888 logistics vehicle system proved so tough in this campaign that its fleet logged over 1 million miles with around 93% of trucks still operational. In 1961, whole blocks of East Berlin still lay in ruins, 16 years after the last shells of World War II had fallen. While the new Cold War border hardened a few streets away, these shattered facades quietly marked where the city had never been rebuilt. Muhammad Ali shadow boxes in London's Hyde Park in front of excited Everton football fans in 1966. The world champion turns a simple training walk into an unexpected street show for the cup crowd. Erich Koch, former ruler of East Prussia and occupied Ukraine, sits in a Warsaw court in October 1958. After years of hiding in Germany under a false name, he is finally brought here to answer for his role in the suffering of millions. Accused restorers of holy icons sit under guard during a quiet but tense trial in the early Soviet Union in 1924. Their work on old paintings was treated as a challenge to new power. Ukrainian village workers received their payment in sacks of grain instead of money in the 1950s. Each bag marks long days in the fields, turning hard work into a harvest that families can touch and carry home. An Ethiopian woman soldier poses with her horse as Italy prepares to invade her country in 1935. In a world that expected her to stay quiet at home, she chooses a uniform, a weapon, and the front line instead. A Soviet street patrol checks the papers of Berlin residents on Berliner Allee in 1945. For people who had survived the fall of the city, a simple walk now began with uniforms, questions, and the feeling that history was watching every step. Parisian women crowd around and kiss an American soldier on the day their city is freed in August 1944. After years of fear and hunger, the arrival of these strangers in olive helmets feels like the first real breath of joy. Kim Il-sung visits young cadets at the elite Mangyongdae Revolutionary School in Pyongyang in 1962. Children of top party and army families eat their simple meal while the leader checks how the future ruling generation is being raised. Women Red Guard fighters pose with rifles during the Finnish Civil War in 1918. In long skirts and work clothes, they stand like a small homegrown army, defending a cause usually left to men. French soldiers stand on a misty hill watching the Rhine and the old Ehrenbreitstein fortress in 1929. Their quiet lookout marks the foreign control of the Rhineland after the First World War, with history hanging over every bend in the river. Pablo Picasso appears in evening dress with Jacqueline Roque, the woman who would become his second wife, in March 1961. He is 79 and she is 37, and together they turn their wedding into one more bold move in the life of a man who never stopped surprising the art world. Workers stand among bricks and scaffolds as the Singer Company House begins to rise in St. Petersburg in 1902. Behind the mess of rubble and tools, one of the city's future landmark buildings is quietly taking shape. A Soviet officer holds the sword of Stalingrad, a ceremonial blade forged on the order of King George VI. In 1943, it was presented as a gift from the people of Britain to honor the courage of the city's defenders. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson of England glide across the ice in Davos, Switzerland, as champions of early pair skating around 1900. Their heavy winter clothes and calm faces make the frozen lake look more like a ballroom than a sports arena. Vnukovo Airport near Moscow in 1946, its runway packed with transport planes as civil air travel slowly returns after the war. The modest terminal building here would later grow into one of the main gates in and out of the Soviet capital. Monks from the Gethsemane Monastery bend over long rows of soil as they plant potatoes near Lake Seliger in the Russian Empire in 1910. This early color photograph catches a quiet moment when prayer, farm work, and deep forest life were all part of the same day. Roma musicians pose in a small studio in 1865, their instruments ready for a night of music. One man calmly smokes a water pipe while the others hold a violin and long-necked lute, freezing a traveling band's world in a single frame. A small Soviet hunter ship of the Northern Fleet speeds across the Barents Sea as a huge column of water erupts from freshly dropped depth charges in 1941. Somewhere below the surface, a hidden submarine is forced to dodge or risk being disabled by the shock wave. An Egyptian man rides a donkey cart while his 3 wives and 2 maids sit closely together under dark veils in the 1870s. The crumbling wall and carved wooden door behind them turn this quiet journey into a rare, frozen glimpse of everyday life in Old Cairo. Doctors from the Botkin City Hospital load a patient into a horse-drawn ambulance carriage in St. Petersburg in 1908. The quiet street scene hides a city-wide cholera outbreak, turning each ride like this into a race against time for the sick. Imperial guards of Haile Selassie stand with rifles at the gate of the Ethiopian Ministry of War in 1935. Within months, these quiet steps and stone walls will face a new Italian attack, and the empire will struggle to keep its place on the map. Young East German soldiers stand at Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin as crowds push forward on the night the Berlin Wall falls in 1989. Their unsure faces show a border that is already dying, while the old rules are still trying to hold on. West German police squeeze together in a human wall to hold back cheering crowds during the visit of United States President John Kennedy to West Berlin in June 1963. Behind their smiles, you can feel a city desperate to show the world it still believes in freedom. German women lean over police and security to reach for John Kennedy as his car moves slowly through West Berlin in 1963. For a moment, the Cold War fades and the visit turns into a pop star scene with screaming fans instead of silent fear. Alma Cummings smiles while soaking her swollen feet after winning one of the first American dance marathons in the early 1920s. She had stayed on the floor for dozens of hours, turning a simple dance into an extreme test of stubborn will. Writer Stephen King covers his face in shy surprise as the cast and crew of The Green Mile celebrate his birthday, on set in 1998. The man whose stories often scare millions spends this day surrounded by smiles, applause, and a cake just out of frame. Senior German officers gather around a tank as General Heinz Guderian visits the 19th Tank Corps on maneuvers early in the war. The tank commander still wears the old-style padded beret, a short-lived detail that almost vanished from later photos. Argentinian fans ride through Buenos Aires at night, waving flags from car roofs after their team wins the 1978 World Cup final against the Netherlands. None of them know it will be decades before the country tastes another world title on home streets again. A Bosnian guard carries a Zastava M70 while escorting a bride and groom through the streets of Sarajevo around 1993. Even as the country slowly breaks apart in the background, this couple insists on a wedding day filled with smiles instead of fear. These X-ray images of Marilyn Monroe were taken in a hospital in November 1954 during a routine medical check. Decades later, they were sold at a Las Vegas auction for $45,000, far more than the price first expected. A young Norma Jean, future Marilyn Monroe, sits in the sand beside her birth mother Gladys on a California beach in the summer of 1929. Although Gladys visited when she could, the little girl would spend most of her childhood moving between foster homes and guardians. A massive Monroe Road Machine Company grader stands ready to cut and shape early American roads in Illinois around 1910. With its tall iron wheels and maze of levers, it turned muddy tracks into smooth routes for the first wave of cars and trucks. Claudine Auger, French actress and model, became world famous when she played Domino in the James Bond film Thunderball in the mid-1960s. On beaches like this, she set the standard for elegant swimwear style that many tried to copy. The 20-year-old Emperor Meiji sits in full court dress with a towering ceremonial hat in Japan in 1872. This quiet young man would soon lead one of the fastest transformations in history, turning a closed samurai country into a modern world power. In 2010, a man bought this small tintype for $2 in a California thrift store, not knowing it showed Billy the Kid playing croquet in 1878. Experts later confirmed it as only the second known photo of the famous outlaw, and its value jumped to about $5 million. 18-year-old Brigitte Bardot stands in her wedding dress beside film director Roger Vadim in Paris in 1952. This marriage would pull her from modeling into cinema and start her rise as one of France's most famous movie stars. Red Army soldiers escort Finnish captives to the border railway line as they are handed back after the Winter War in April 1940. Among them walks a former member of the Lotta Svard Women's Auxiliary, carrying her basket home with the help of the very men who once guarded her. Soldiers inspect the broken tail of an Iraqi Scud missile that was shot down in the desert by a Patriot air defense missile during Operation Desert Storm in 1991. It was one of the first times in history that a system designed for aircraft successfully intercepted a ballistic missile in combat. Engineers in white coats sit at a wall of dials and glowing screens in the control room of Obninsk in the Soviet Union in 1954. This quiet hall became the first place on Earth where an atomic power station sent electricity into a city grid. A mechanic crawls under the suspended hull of the German Super Heavy tank Maus to repair its massive suspension. The giant machine hangs on a powerful hydraulic jack, making the scene look like a tiny person working beneath a steel house on tracks. Playwright George Bernard Shaw poses with his wooden surfboard on a Cape Town beach in 1931. In his 70s, he still chased waves and new hobbies instead of a quiet retirement. The Soviet-built MAZ 541 airfield tug looks like a giant luxury car but was designed to push heavy planes across the runway. With its huge body, low roof, and 4 doors, it is often called the largest sedan in the world. Children climb over a captured German heavy mortar displayed on the Mall in London in 1918. A machine built to fire shells now serves as a strange playground, turning victory into an after-school game. Workers shovel coal from barges into the hungry boilers of a river steamboat in Tennessee in 1906. From this floating factory, black fuel turns into white steam that pushes trade and people up and down the American rivers. Dutch soldiers stand in formation with dog-drawn carts carrying machine guns during the mobilization of 1914. Using strong dogs instead of horses or engines, the Army turned loyal pets into small living tractors for the battlefield. Young actors Ronald Reagan and Jane Wyman hold hands and smile on their wedding day in California in 1940. Years later, he would become President of the United States, while this glamorous Hollywood marriage turned into only the first chapter of his public life. Fidel Castro shares a table with Yuri Gagarin in Cuba in 1961, not long after the young pilot became the first human to travel into space. The quiet man in the background is Ernesto Guevara, watching as 2 new symbols of the age swap stories over dinner. The Moulin Rouge Cinema in Oakland, California, stands boarded up and silent in 1983, its flashing days already past. Photographer Max Yavno catches the fake windmill and peeling posters like a small American echo of the famous Paris Cabaret. German soldiers march in summer 1941 while smiling for a rare color photograph. Beside them walk 2 captured Red Army men, forced to carry the heavy ammunition for their guards. Model Lorraine Johnston shows off a sky-high floral hairstyle at an international hairdressing and beauty exhibition in Toronto in 1926. Her towering wig turns her into a walking sculpture, advertising just how far beauty fashion was ready to go. Author Margaret Mitchell holds a copy of her novel Gone with the Wind in the United States in 1939. It was her only book, yet by then it had already sold millions of copies and was about to become a legendary film. 2 German soldiers crouch in a snowy firing position as they feed rounds into an MG-34 machine gun. The calm way they handle the weapon hides how quickly this steel tool could change the shape of the battlefield around them. Cabaret dancers warm up in a narrow backstage corridor at the Lido in Paris around 1950, kicking into handstands against the wall. A few minutes later, these playful stretches will turn into high kicks and bright smiles under the stage lights. Armed Romanian rebels sit casually in Nicolae Ceausescu's once untouchable office during the December 1989 uprising. Days later, the leader who tried to control every detail of daily life was gone from power, leaving only his empty rooms behind. A hidden home distilling setup stands in a wooden shed of old believers near Bukhtarma in Altai in 1927. Their quiet still shows that even very strict religious communities sometimes bent the rules in private while staying stern in public. French General Joseph Joffre leans in to pin medals on soldiers who held the line at Verdun in March 1916. The battle around them lasted 302 days and drained both armies of hundreds of thousands of men, so this quiet field ceremony feels like a brief pause after an almost endless storm. Young women in matching uniforms stand at attention in an elite cadet platoon in San Diego in 1943. During the war years, such all-female drill teams often trained hard by day and performed at parades and charity events to keep spirits high at home. Crowds watch as a Washington inventor shows off a strange metal safety wing on the front of his Studebaker in September 1925. The cage-like frame was meant to scoop up anyone hit by the car and save them from going under the wheels. A traditional Jewish wedding takes place in Tbilisi in 1968, with the couple standing under a simple cloth canopy held by friends. In a small Soviet apartment, old ritual words and songs quietly keep centuries of culture alive. A Moskvich 412 from a British racing team tears past a herd of elephants during the brutal safari rally in 1975. Out of 80 cars, only 14 reached the finish line, and this brave little sedan was not among them. Young Harry Truman poses stiffly in his officer's uniform during the First World War in France in 1917. This quiet artillery captain would one day sit in the White House as President of the United States, making decisions that shaped the new atomic age. Designers bend over giant sheets of paper in a drafting office in the United States in 1935. With only pencils, rulers, and bright desk lamps, they quietly shape the buildings, bridges, and machines that will define the modern city. German soldiers in World War I pose for a joke photo, stripped down to boots, helmets, and rifles in 1915. In some quiet front line sectors, enemy troops were so close that they sometimes traded bread for drink and shared brief moments of uneasy peace. Suspected ringleader and members of an armed group stand for police photographs in Soviet Belarus in the late 1940s. Their names are scribbled under each portrait, turning this simple lineup into a frozen page from the post-war underworld. American actress Rita Hayworth poses in a sleek swimsuit on a bicycle by the pool at the Beverly Hills Hotel in California in 1940. Before she became a global movie icon, studios used summer scenes like this to turn her into the dream girl of wartime America. 16-year-old Sigmund Freud stands beside his mother Amalia in a studio portrait taken in 1872. The quiet teenager in this picture would later reshape modern psychology with his radical ideas about the hidden life of the mind. French flamethrower teams send a rolling wall of fire across no man's land in Flanders, Belgium in 1918. The huge cloud of smoke shows how new weapons could turn the ground between trenches into a blazing furnace in seconds. Two infantrymen of the British 58th Division examine a captured German MG 0815 machine gun near Amiens in August 1918. In a landscape of broken stone and dugouts, this heavy trophy shows how quickly weapons could change owners on the Western Front. A row of nearly identical company-owned houses stands beside the railroad near Birmingham, Alabama in 1936. Steel workers lived here under the mill's shadow, their rent, work, and daily noise all controlled by the same employer. Inside the glass cockpit of a Messerschmitt Bf 110, a German pilot flies high over France in November 1940, surrounded by dials and gauges. The photo feels almost calm, yet every needle and switch here was part of a fast-moving air war above the clouds. Ground crew and pilots prepare a German Messerschmitt Bf 110 for takeoff from a French airfield during the Battle of Britain. The twin-engine fighter looks calm on the grass, but in minutes it will be part of the deadly air duels over the English Channel. Women factory workers load huge artillery shells onto carts in a British munitions plant during the First World War. While men fought at the front, these munition girls kept the big guns supplied and quietly turned factories into another battlefield of effort. Munitions worker Lily Maud Lever stands in her factory coat in Britain in 1917, one of the young women who filled TNT shells for the war. Like many canary girls whose skin turned yellow from the chemical, she later lost her life to TNT exposure, a quiet sacrifice far from the trenches. Shipyard crews at Bethlehem Fairfield in Baltimore grab a quick lunch in 1943 before going back to welding Liberty ships for the Allied war effort. These cheap, all-welded cargo workhorses were built by the thousands, and one of them, SS John W. Brown, still sails today as a living museum of that industrial victory. Ronald Reagan waves from the airplane stairs in 1989 as Nancy reaches up to cover the bald patch left by his recent head surgery. Even as a former president, he briefly forgets that cameras never miss a thing. A German SS soldier offers a treat to a village girl as a cameraman records this staged friendship scene in occupied Ukraine, summer 1941. The photo was created for the regime's propaganda machine, hiding the brutal reality of the occupation behind smiles and small gifts. During the Great Depression, a small-town hardware store in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, crammed its window with every tool and gadget a family needed to fix, scrub, cook, and survive without buying new things. In 1935, this chaos of buckets, saws, mops, and pans was the face of American do-it-yourself economy. Soviet infantry scramble out of a trench and charge across open ground toward German positions on the Eastern Front, early 1940s. In such attacks, a single blast or a stumble into a shell crater could mean the difference between coming home or vanishing on the battlefield forever. Silent film idol Rudolph Valentino poses with beauty contest winners in San Francisco, each clutching a towering silver trophy, 1923. At the peak of his fame, crowds treated him like royalty, and such events helped turn him into one of Hollywood's first global heartthrobs. A French border guard carries suitcases and bundles for exhausted Spanish refugees as they trudge through a mountain pass in 1938. Thousands crossed the Pyrenees like this during the Spanish Civil War, trading their homes for an uncertain safety on the other side.